Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk with Wajat Lee for the Left Hook Substack, where I invite a subject matter expert who is far smarter than me to break down one big subject in 30 minutes or less. And today, I'm very excited. For the first time, I have Leah Litman, Professor Litman. Unlike me, she's not just an attorney, but she actually is a professor of law at the University of Michigan, and she is the author of the new book Lawless, which we're going to talk about. And a great subtitle is How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. She's also the co-host of Strict Scrutiny, and she writes frequently about the Supreme Court for media outlets such as the Washington Post, Slate, and the Atlantic. So she has found a way to do all the things I should have done, and my immigrant parents are going to watch this and be like, why can't you be like Leah? What's wrong with you? But she's here, Leah. So you are the one that is trying to explain to the average Jose and the average Jane, and I appreciate this about you. These what many people, it's archaic concepts for folks like originalist theory, executive privilege, Marbury versus Madison, but you break it down in layman's terms. And your book talks about the lawlessness, if your words, of this conservative majority, and you take these high big concepts and you break it down and you make it funny. So I appreciate it. And what I really want to talk about is the book itself, and specifically this Supreme Court. Let's talk about how this conservative Supreme Court majority is utterly lawless and complicit with the Trump administration. And you first say bad vibes, and I want to start. I want to go in reverse, right? You have grievance, fringe theories, and bad vibes. Let's start with vibes, because even the layman will say, "Oh yeah, I hear that they're beholden to something called the originalist theory, right? They just want to go back to the framers and founders." But you reject that and say, "No, no, no, it's just vibes." Can you unpack that for folks who've heard this but don't understand the bullshit behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So by vibes, what I really mean is they're not doing things that are objective and determinate like we imagine law to be. Instead, they're relying a lot on their personal feelings, as well as the general zeitgeist and political talking points of the Republican Party. So just on originalism specifically, I mean, for one thing, they ignore originalism when it's not convenient. When they struck down a key piece of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, wasn't so much a mention of the history of the Reconstruction Amendments. Instead, they just declared that the Constitution prohibits the federal government from unfairly discriminating against the former Confederacy, who felt very put out by the whole voting rights thing. And then even on originalism, there's just a ton of wiggle room within originalism. So when they overruled Roe versus Wade, for example, they had to decide, do we care about what the laws were on the books? They prohibited abortion. Do we care how the laws were enforced, which were never enforced in cases before quickening, before a fetus was viable? Or do we care about the law on the ground? The reality is women got abortions. So they made a choice to say, we only care about the law on the books, and therefore abortion is not a constitutional right. So lots of vibes all over.
Yeah, it's all about the vibes, and it's like, they treat the Constitution as Play-Doh, and it seems like what they're doing is they will manipulate the law. They will backtrack on themselves to achieve their desired end, regardless, right? That's all that matters. Like, I want to get to my end goal, and this is how I'll just double over like a Cirque du Soleil gymnastic. No disrespect to Cirque du Soleil gymnastics to
They're
get
very
there.
talented.
Can you tell us like this because I think it's really terrifying, right? This rage against the equal protection, which
Yeah.
gives us so many of these freedoms and civil liberties that we got in the 20th century, and how you're seeing Alito and Thomas in particular just openly kind of tell you like, oh, we got rid of Roe. Well, this is what's next.
Yeah. So the rage against equal protection, where to start? I mean, if there's one controlling principle of the six Republican justices, it is no discrimination exists except for discrimination against white evangelical Christians and other members of the Republican constituency. The second principle is the only thing worse than discrimination is calling something discrimination. That is unfair to the people who want to engage in discrimination. So, really, this project started in the aftermath of the Civil War, when the wholly racist President Andrew Johnson tried to veto civil rights laws, which just would have prohibited discrimination against formerly enslaved persons, and said those are unfair to white people and unfair preferential treatment to formerly enslaved persons. And it's these same ideas that we see recycled today in attacks on voting rights and civil rights for racial minorities, as well as attacks on rights for the LGBT community. They love to insist that discrimination against the LGBT community isn't discrimination at all, while then inverting the concepts of equality and discrimination to say when you prohibit discrimination against the LGBT community, that itself is discrimination against the religious and social conservatives who object to LGBT equality. And so that is this kind of, I think, a big part of what is behind this attack on equal protection for so many different groups and in so many different contexts.
And we have some great topical examples this week. Let's unpack it, right? Supreme Court, again, at least temporarily, allows Donald Trump to ban transgender soldiers from the military. And also, we look at that Supreme Court in this case in Maryland, which is close by, a case I've been trying to warn Democrats, progressives, anyone about for years.
Yes.
Take this seriously, right? They're using not a white parent, they're using a Muslim parent, much like they use an Asian parent, an Asian student to go after affirmative action, to go after DEI. Can you unpack these two cases right now? How this is literally an example of what you just said?
Yes. Okay. So I'll take the ban on transgender service members first. So in that case, of course, Donald Trump did what he did during his first administration, which is announce this cruel, wholly animus-laden policy, just banning any transgender individuals from serving in the military. And then when the policy goes into court, they say, oh, this isn't discrimination against trans people. We're just, prohibiting gender affirming care for anyone who wants to live in accordance with not their sex assigned at birth, but their gender identity. So they declare, right, that gender affirming care isn't actually just for transgender people, and therefore it's not discrimination at all. This was literally a theory in the cases where states were defending their bans on gender affirming care for minors. This is a theory that's up at the United States Supreme Court. We are waiting for them to decide this case about whether Tennessee's ban on gender affirming care for minors is unconstitutional discrimination against trans people. And I think they're going to say it's not, because they just love to say discrimination isn't discrimination when it's against anyone who isn't a member of the core Republican base. So that's that case. And the ban on transgender service members is going to be allowed to stay in effect while the litigation is ongoing, challenging that ban. So, I mean, unfortunately, I just don't think that policy is going away during the Trump administration. And then the Maryland case you mentioned about, oh boy, this one is wild. So Maryland Public School District decided, after doing a review and consulting with parents, they wanted to include some reading material with LGBT characters. So they included some of those books in classroom instruction. And a group of parents sued, arguing that including LGBTQ plus instructive material in the classroom was unconstitutional discrimination against them because, according to their religious belief, I guess LGBT people shouldn't be allowed to exist. And so this was just a wild Supreme Court argument. I'll stop because, I don't want to keep talking, but
no,
wow.
I want you to talk. You can please, that's why you're here.
Oh boy. Okay. Okay. Oof. Okay. So in that argument, Justice Alito went absolutely apoplectic about this book called Uncle Bobby's Wedding, that is about a young girl named Chloe who is concerned that her favorite uncle is about to get married and will have less time to spend with her. Justice Alito read this book that includes a wedding involving a man marrying a man and said, this is a personal attack and rank discrimination against me and other individuals who object to religious equality. He said he read the book and basically thought, look, what Chloe is really saying is, I have a sincere religious objection to this same-sex marriage, mommy. And he imagined her mommy saying something like, no, Chloe, that's bad and evil because gay people have to be allowed to get married because that's what liberals want. Like, that is what he read into the book. Like, they perceive the mere acknowledgement of LGBT individuals, right? Books that just define what it means to be trans, what it means to be gay, as an attack against them. And that is just like a running theme of the book, how the big through line is it's all about victimhood, right? Like this conservative grievance energy, like they think they are the victims anytime a law or policy is not what they want.
Yeah, the constant grievance, and I'm so glad you mentioned it in your subtitle, right? How the Supreme Court, and you could honestly say MAGA right-wing movements, both here and abroad, run on conservative 24/7 manufactured grievance. Yeah, it's like a main line. It's right there. You have to give them something. They have to be pissed off about LGBTQ people. Documented. Once that's done, M&Ms. Once that done, Black
the
Little
green M&M.
Yeah, the
real
green M&M. The green M&M. The Black Little Mermaids. Bud Light commercials. There's always something. And this grievance, though, is real because it animates radical views and, as we've seen, a violent insurrection. Specifically, what it's also animating is this sincere belief of not just this conservative Supreme Court, but you mentioned this also, of also many, not all of them are like this, meaning the MAGA movement, but a large chunk of the MAGA movement are, if you will, white Christian nationalists or Christian
Yeah.
nationalists, right? And they believe that they are victimized. They believe they are oppressed. They believe that society hates them. And as such, it is their God given right to use whatever levers of power they have to make themselves and Jesus and America Christian and great again. Going back to the Supreme Court. Uh, I don't know, but I'm not a Christian. I went to all boys Catholic school, but I also, like I said, am a former recovering attorney. I know there's a concept of separation of church and state with robust religious freedoms. Can you talk about this case, which I think is pretty terrifying, where I think it was just last week, God, every
Yeah.
day is like 6 years, is like interstellar
Yes.
a time, where the Supreme Court, the conservative majority of the Supreme Court, is open for public funds to be used for the first time to fund a Catholic charter school.
This case is wild, and it is just the perfect example of the escalating conservative grievances
Yeah.
because now they seem to think the Establishment Clause, the separation of church and state, is itself unconstitutional as rank discrimination against them. So the case involves St. Isidors, which, as you note, is a Catholic charter school. And so Oklahoma has a state constitutional provision that says, there will not be sectarian public charter schools. And so the Oklahoma Attorney General sued to say, St. Isidor's, this Catholic school, cannot be a public charter school. We can't have religious public charter schools. And Oklahoma Supreme Court agreed. These are not big liberal squishes, the Oklahoma Attorney General and Oklahoma Supreme Court. And now the United States Supreme Court is deciding whether it is actually unconstitutional discrimination for a state to operate a public charter system that has secular schools but not religious schools. And literally at the oral argument, Brett Kavanaugh called it, quote, rank discrimination
There you go.
for a state not to fund religious public charter schools. So effectively, they are going to be requiring states to have religious public charter schools if they have any charter school system at all, because they feel so aggrieved without the state supporting their religious public charter schools. And no one is questioning. Of course, these religious schools could operate as private schools. Like they can absolutely do that. That's not the question. The question is whether the state has to operate them and fund them as religious public charter schools.
And I think the hypocrisy that is so apparent is whenever I say, "Oh, so you're gonna fund schools that promote the Church of Satan? Are you gonna fund Islamic schools, Jewish schools? Of course we will. Why not? Oh, and so will you opt out of anything that you think is offensive, DEI, which is basically all of us, or LGBTQ? What happens if it's, oh, I don't know, a Muslim character if they're reading Miss Marvel, or I don't know if someone doesn't like a book about the Civil War, or I don't know the movie Sinners, right? Like, Leah, can you connect the dots for people who say, well, you know what? I just don't like the gays. It's gross, and so why can't I, as a parent, support these endeavors? It's fine. It's just look, it's me and my religious freedoms, and I'll just opt out. I'm not stopping you. I'll opt out. All the folks, especially the people of color and religious minorities, who are being co-opted both voluntarily and I think in a deceptive way, who are going along with it, saying, no, 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 Waj, you're just getting carried away as usual. This won't impact us. It's only limited to this small thing.
It is never just limited to this small thing. So,
Mm-mm.
5 years ago, the Supreme Court had this big case about religious discrimination, and it was about whether religious schools were entitled to receive money to repave playgrounds. And the Supreme Court said, state, when you're like handing out money to different schools, you can't deny a religious school these funds for playground resurfacing if you're giving that to secular schools because the money isn't going for religious instruction. And so people said, oh, that's no big deal. Well, what was the ask 2 to 3 years later? Then it was, well, I want tax credits and tax subsidies for supporting religious schools. Now, what's the ask 3 years after that? It's now we need religious public charter schools. So it's never as simple as one small thing. This ask is happening in the context of a movement for white Christian nationalism. And if you think about it, opt outs, like it is impossible to operate a public school system where you are designing individualized curriculum for
Exactly.
every single student. And so, what in fact you are doing is you are allowing parents to set the curriculum for all public schools because public schools, they don't have enough teachers, they don't have enough resources to offer every student the individualized curriculum on every subject where a parent might have some objection to. So, that's why the law up until now has been look, the mere exposure to ideas you disagree with or even have objections to has never been sufficient to give rise to this sort of religious discrimination claim.
And like I said, for those who know, spoiler alert, I'm a Muslim. I went to an all-boys Jesuit Catholic high school, still Muslim. Got exposed, at UC Berkeley, took world religions, still Muslim, right?
Yeah.
I have friends who are atheist. I have friends who are Jewish. I have friends from all different ethnicities and religions, right? But you're exposed, you're more aware, makes you more, I hope, informed, empathetic, right? But what they want to do, and I think it's very important, is they want to curate the education system and the cultural system to
Yes.
fit their narrow view, right? So that
Yes.
means attacks on science, attacks on
Yep.
theories they don't like, attacks on facts they don't like, oh, I don't know, the 2020 election was actually not stolen, but he lost. That is what's down the pipeline. And also, you see, oh, we're fine with all religions, but you've seen, can you tell people how this particular conservative Supreme Court, right?
Yeah.
All the MAGA folks are like, oh, we're fine with all religion, Muslims and Jews, but no, they have a track record of being extremely sympathetic uh, towards Christianity and white Christian groups.
Yes, definitely. So this is, as you say, like a big theme of the book, how, the Republican justices don't just view white Christian nationalists, religious and social conservatives as the victims, is that they allow them to project their own views
Mm.
onto the rest of us. So, like, this is the law, but we're all being ruled by their vibes and conservative grievances and underlying ideology. For those who say, well, this is just about religion writ large, I guess I would say as follows. One is there was a really significant religious discrimination case that the court heard 5 years ago. It was called Trump versus Hawaii. It was a
Mm.
challenge to, President Trump during his first administration efforts to ban entry into the United States from several Muslim majority countries. As a candidate, he had promised a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. What does he do within his first few weeks in office? He fires off this haphazard, chaotic Muslim ban without announcement, and then puts it through a few iterations. It goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, no religious discrimination here whatsoever. So the court is fine ignoring very real instances of discrimination against certain religions, but it sees discrimination against white evangelical Christians everywhere. Again, they are on the cusp of declaring part of the Constitution, the Establishment Clause, unconstitutional because, right, it doesn't give white evangelical Christians what they want. Like, that is why I describe the court as lawless. Like, this conservative grievance energy, the victimization complex, it is literally cannibalizing all of law and our legal system.
And also you see them what they've done to help Donald Trump. Let's be honest,
Yeah.
that summer ruling. I thought, Leah, they won't go that far. And look, I've been a critic of the Supreme Court. I've tried to raise the alarm for years, but before that ruling came out and we read it, I'm like, okay, yeah, they're going to try to help Donald Trump, but they still have some fidelity to the rule of law, some fidelity to the appearance, the performative appearance that Justice Roberts always tries to sell to the public, right? That, oh no, we have to maintain the reputation of the Supreme Court. I thought that, I mean, there's several examples, but that absolute immunity
Yeah.
ruling in the summer, which, let's be honest, was for Donald Trump,
Hmm.
that to me was them saying no more dog whistles.
That ruling was truly stunning. And I agree it was surprising, even for people who were rightfully critical and skeptical of the Supreme Court. And in some ways, now is an odd time to be writing a book about how bad the Supreme Court is, as everyone is looking to the courts, including the Supreme Court, to save us from some aspects of Trumpism. But I completely agree with you that a big part of the story here is how this Supreme Court has enabled Trumpism and Donald Trump specifically. The immunity ruling, in addition to its substance, they slowly slow walked it to all
Yeah.
but guarantee he was not going to face any trial on the election interference charges before people went to vote in the 2024 election. Even before that, they said states cannot keep Donald Trump off the ballot on the ground that he participated in an insurrection against the United States in violation of the 14th Amendment. And so they cleared the way for him to appear on the ballot. I think they also helped his cause for being elected president by not allowing Joe Biden to govern. They blew up one of Joe Biden's most popular initiatives, the student debt relief cancellation program. And if you read the interviews with people who voted for Donald Trump, in all of them, there's often a reference to Joe Biden not giving them student debt relief when he promised to do so, when in fact it was the Republican Supreme Court running interference for the Republican Party, making it harder for Democrats to govern. So I agree this Supreme Court has absolutely paved the way for Trumpism. The absolute immunity ruling. I mean, if you're wondering, where does Donald Trump get the crazy idea that he is above the law and not bound by the law and can ignore the law? Well, my goodness, 6 Republican justices told him, like, you are not accountable to or subject to criminal laws while performing your presidential official duties.
Yeah, I mean, literally, that's what they said. It's in the Supreme Court ruling, and the fact that Roberts went along with it and Barrett went along with it, I think it finally laid to rest all these individuals who kept telling us, not me, because I saw through it, that Justice Roberts is the moderate. And you go back to voting rights, and I really appreciated that Justice Roberts, his goal since what, college, was to gut the Voting Rights Act. And as soon as he got on the bench, folks, people forget Shelby. That's him. That was his goal. Like, he had wet dreams about this probably as a teenager, right? And that's what he accomplished. So yeah, once in a while he might come out and save Obamacare, but then this is who Justice Roberts is. And if you ever doubt us, we give you that ruling, which gave, let's be honest, Donald Trump absolute immunity for his core functions. And now he just rules through executive decisions and actions, which, by the way, just because it's an executive decision doesn't mean it's the law, folks.
No.
Even I know that. A culmination of all of this, and you wrote about it in the beginning of your book, right, was, and I think people keep forgetting this, I do not, I keep the receipts, is that we have at least 2 members of the Supreme Court who, in my opinion, are essentially right-wing extremists in black robes, complicit in the insurrection. We have Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, who have become more emboldened in the past 2 years, right? Almost like without any like no dog whistles. They don't even have to perform anymore. And talk to us about their complicity vis-a-vis their wives and January 6th. Because I think January 6th and what their wives in particular did is like a great culmination of conservative grievance, fringe theories, vibes.
Ginny Thomas, where to begin? She's basically become like a political operator. And one of the things I quote from her in the book is a speech she gave where she said, conservatives are tired of being the victims and the oppressed minorities, right? This just perfectly captures the conservative grievance vibe. And so in the aftermath of the 2020 election that Donald Trump legitimately lost, she felt very put out by that. And so she was one of the people texting state legislators asking them to throw out the results of the election and install Donald Trump as president. In some of these texts, she talked about how the Biden crime family should be held off of barges on Guantanamo Bay. I mean, my goodness, if you want a window into far-right conspiracy theories, Ginny Thomas is a perfect encapsulation of that. And while this is all happening, Justice Thomas is happily sitting on the Supreme Court deciding case after case about January 6th, whether individuals will face any accountability for trying to overthrow the results of the election. So that's House Thomas in a nutshell. Then you have House Alito. New York Times uncovered and reported that in the aftermath of the 2020 election, the Alito's homes, 2 of the homes displayed not 1, but 2 different flags associated with January 6th and the Stop the Steal movement. One was an upside down American flag. The other was an Appeal to Heaven flag. And again, when the story broke, what did Justice Alito do? Not his fault. It's his wife's. And again, as this is happening, he's deciding cases relating to January 6th, including the immunity ruling and the president. Mrs. Alito was also caught on tape by a kind of undercover journalist in which she said she was so offended by pride flags and seeing them on her neighbor's property, she wanted to come up with her own flag that had a flame on it and the word vergogna, which is Italian for shame. Because again, the appearance of symbols celebrating LGBTQ equality and the existence of LGBT people is apparently so offensive to her, she needed a counter statement.
Exactly right. It's our existence. Our
Yeah.
existence is offensive to them. And if they can be in control, for them, it's a zero sum game, right? So, like,
Yeah.
the analogy I always give people is, and I've been saying this for 10 years because I've been unfortunately following this conservative movement and the fringe theories and conspiracies and a perpetual white grievance, is if given a choice between sharing a house with us or burning down the house, they will elect to burn down the village, right? It's
Yes.
all zero sum for them. So, like, hey, man, like, yay, we have like a woman and a Muslim and a Jew on the board of leadership for the first time ever. And what they think is, my daddy and my granddaddy were on that board. You took the seat away from
Yes.
them, right?
Yes.
But that writ large across the board in media and politics and law, that's how they think. In perpetual grievance. But you also mentioned something which I think is also very important in the book, that this is not just like some a few nutty people who somehow got on the court, right? This is a well-oiled, well-funded machine. It is a very deliberate machine that allowed these justices, if I'm going to use the word, they were groomed to do this very job that they're doing to our democracy. Can you talk about the machine behind it, the multi-million dollar Republican machine?
Yeah, so most people, I think at this point, have heard of the Federalist Society, which was this organization started in the 1980s and kind of evolved into this brutally effective screening mechanism to identify people who were true believers who, when appointed to the Supreme Court, would toe the party line. That Federalist Society and related network were also created to kind of counter the mainstream media and to create this ecosystem that would give the justices plaudits and applause when they did Republican things, whereas they were being criticized for doing that by mainstream media who wasn't so into fringe theories and alternative reality. So that's part of it. But the specter, like the sheer volume of the money, is just staggering.
Yeah.
So in chapter 4 of the book, I talk about how the Supreme Court has partially laid the groundwork for the oligarchy, that we are in now by clearing the way for these mega rich, ultra rich billionaires to pour obscene amounts of money into the political system, drown out messaging, effectively by themselves influence and access to political officials. And unsurprisingly, now a lot of that money is making its way to the Supreme Court. The Republican appointees go off on these junkets that are funded by law schools that took money from, the Koch network, Charles Koch and whatnot, and they send them to Italy and whatnot, for a
Totally
few
normal,
weeks during
not
the
corrupt at all.
summer.
Not
Exactly. You have Harlan Crow buying Clarence Thomas's mother's house and developing it, sending his grandnephew to school, and the justices just insist, not a problem, right? Because influence and access is not corruption.
And you got Leonard Leo, who just got an infusion of cash from Barry Said to pretty much do this for the next 40 years. It's a 40-year plan that sadly
Yeah.
was successful. I want to ask you two quick questions. Justice Barrett, can she be, if you will, this oddball outlier that might go against the conservatives? And I say this because I had an interview with a Harvard law professor and constitutional law scholar, and he kind of predicted, it was 2 months ago, that of all of them, he thinks that Justice Barrett, and they're all, right-wing conservatives, operatives, sure. He said, because she's like a true believer, and not just a true believer in the sense that, she's Christian, she's, involved in service, but she's been exposed, he said, to more people of color, more, marginalized groups, that she might come around on a few and be a curveball. Your take on that?
No, I think Justice Barrett, like the other Republican
But are you sure? That
appointees,
was very subtle.
yeah. Justice Barrett, like the other Republican appointees, has a few issues where she's not totally in alignment with her Republican counterparts. For her, that has tended to be these big structural con law cases involving
Mm.
Donald Trump. But on issues of social policy, social conservatism, she's totally with the other Republican appointees. She was to the right of Brett Kavanaugh on a Voting Rights Act case from 2 years ago. So I'm not seeing it.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I was like, I don't know. I was doubtful. What is the end game? Suppose there are no checks and balances on this Supreme Court, and because we live in the worst timeline, Alito, Thomas, not Young Bucks, Sotomayor, doesn't have the best health. This mother effer, Donald Trump, might be the luckiest person on earth and get two or maybe even three more justices by the time he leaves, which apparently is going to be never. What's the end game?
Endgame is to entrench their own power, enable more minority rule so that the rule of law effectively becomes ruled by Republicans, and impose their underlying worldview and ideology on the rest of us. It's deeply anti-conservative, but they kind of want like a state-imposed ideology that is driven by religious views.
And also grievance. And I
Oh,
have to
yeah.
ask you about this because I'm glad this is finally getting mainstream. Have you followed the right wing grievance that they've raised millions of dollars for a middle aged white mom who repeatedly called
Yes.
I think it was a black kid the N word,
Yes.
and they're
Yes.
saying that it's the white woman who is the victim,
Yes.
not the black person who was repeatedly called the N word, and now they're saying that it's her right and her freedom of speech right to say it. Like it's just a beautiful example of everything you've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think people have started to see quite clearly the conservative grievance and victimization energy within Republican social circles, public commentators, and political officials. And I want them to see that same energy in the Supreme Court now because it's there.
It's the same one. Okay. My final question for you is we always try, we can't be cynical. We can't be apathetic. I mean, you can, but I would recommend against it. And to quote Andor, rebellions are built on hope. Many people might hear this and say, it's over. It's toast. Like Supreme Court, they're there for life. They seem to be completely unimpeachable, according to Justice Roberts. They're openly, nakedly, shamelessly being corrupt as F. What can we do to hold these people accountable as they literally play Play-Doh with our Constitution and are willing to rig and jam and distort anything and everything to create their utopia, which is, like you said, right-wing minoritarian rule for Christian nationalism and a Justice Thomas?
Yeah, so obviously that sounds quite bleak and is quite dispiriting. But just as I think people recognize we should not be obeying in advance for the Trump administration,
Mm.
neither should we be obeying in advance and giving up with respect to the Supreme Court, right? This is a fight that is worth fighting. They have tried to make it seem so bleak and difficult that we aren't going to try, but you cannot let these guys win, right? So try to convince people that something is wrong with the Supreme Court, build the political momentum so that the next time progressives, the left, hold political power, they can actually enact some reforms that would democratize the Supreme Court and de-weaponize it, for lack of a better word.
And the best ways to stay informed, folks, we've seen
Yes.
that when you're informed and when the majority is informed, things change.
Yep.
On immigration, Donald Trump is underwater. Why? Because people were informed about him completely violating due process and sending innocent immigrants to die in a foreign gulag. He's negative 21 last time I checked on Kilmar Garcia, an innocent man sent to essentially die in a gulag. He's negative on tariffs when people find out what tariffs are all about. He's negative on the economy. He's negative across the board. So if you are informed and if you keep this in the news and if you spread the word and if you join movements, guess what? This type of pressure actually works, right?
Yes.
When you hold their feet to the fire, it actually works. When you hold them accountable in the public, it actually works. And one of the ways you can be informed and make people accountable is read the book. The book is fantastic. It's coming out next week, I believe, May 13th.
Yes.
I'm one of the cool nerd kids. I got a free advance copy. The book, again, is Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. It is written by Professor Leah Litman, professor of law at the University of Michigan, also co-host of the fantastic Strict Scrutiny podcast, author of the new book Lawless. And Leah, before you leave, shamelessly promote yourself. How can people support you? How can people find you?
Well, first, the book will be out next week. My goal is to make people on the right very angry and fuel their victim complex by having the book do well. So definitely get your copy of Lawless. My co-host and I on Strict Scrutiny, our new episodes drop every Monday. I think we have a good time. It's a great way to stay up to speed on what the Supreme Court is doing and what these guys and Amy are up to now. I'm also on Blue Sky at Leah Litman, and my dog has an Instagram account,
And I
Ms.
bet you that
Stevie Doodle.
Stevie Doodle, nothing you do. This is what like will humble you always. Even if the book is a bestseller and it sells inshallah like millions of copies, your dog will still have more followers.
Oh, yeah. And she should. She deserves it.
Yeah, that's how you make the money through cat and dog pics, folks. This is where we are in America, but it's okay. They give us so much joy.
Exactly.
Folks, buy the book, and please, please stay informed. This has been The Left Hook. As always, I have no paywalls because I'm a fool. I keep everything for free. You pay what you can because people should be informed during the rise of fascism. It's thelefthook.substack.com. Until next time, please, please, please be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and don't be a fascist. Take care.